Thank you very much. How's everybody doing? Super. So I'm wondering, how many of you all have made a comment to yourselves within your code itself? Like you do that little hashtag, and okay, a room full of my best friends. That's wonderful. So there's a lot of reasons to do that. A few of these might resonate with you. There could have been a variable that you were a little scared to change. You might have copy-pasted a section of code from Stack Overflow, and maybe you aren't sure exactly what it does. Okay, maybe just a few of you. And you may have had a choice that you made in your code that you wanted to explain to your future selves so that you didn't forget why you had made that decision. But as you were making that last comment, did you think that you were writing documentation? So documentation is what allows code to be used, expanded, and adapted, and for community to be formed around your project. So you were probably making a note about something that was unclear, and that like lack of clarity can point us towards the documentation that we need to make. And as this comic perfectly illustrates, documentation can cause or relieve programmer pain. We don't want to end up in that bottom panel. So there can be lots of different reasons to write these comments. They can allow stand-in doc writing. Some people even treat it as a notepad within their code itself, and it can help explain why. And you might be thinking that with all these really great reasons to use comments, that we would be just dropping them everywhere. Just comment for you get a comment. But why don't we do that? There's like some pretty good reasons not to do that. No one has any idea why not? Time? Anything else?
Signal to noise ratio.
Signal to noise ratio, that's true. And there's one more that we hear a lot. I heard a lot when I was getting ready for this talk about code rot. And people said things like the code should speak for itself, and comments rot, and comments mean time to refactor. And this is all really great, except for if you remember our little friend who's trying to figure out whether they should be doing this or whether this is like an anti-pattern, like worst practice, like no. Especially when it comes to refactoring. I just want to take a minute and talk about factoring. So when does refactoring happen? If your workplace values creating code over maintaining code, and many of us, our first jobs in smaller companies where people are trying to get things done, it kind of has that kind of culture. And so you might not have time for feedback built in to your process, and that time refactoring might feel like a nice to have. So you end up refactoring, code that you wrote a year ago, 2 years ago, and you really need to get back into the headspace of where you were when you did that, so the problem grows. You wait till you can't stand it anymore. And refactoring starts to feel like an act of self-care. Now, we really shouldn't be in the position where we have to start lighting candles and playing nice concentration music and getting into the mood to refactor. He looks so uncomfortable, though. But a lot of us find ourselves in this position. And so we're back here. And this comment takes on even more nuance if we think of those rotten comments that we're being warned about. So no longer is the message in this comic, docs are super important to your community, y'all, but also it means having outdated docs can mislead. And in fact, there have been real losses that could have been avoided by a well-placed Inline comment. As I was getting ready to give this talk, I talked to one person who told me about an incredible loss in user data due to a Jev changing a value unknowingly. It really seems like a great time for one of those "there be dragons here, don't mess with this" kind of comments, don't you think? I don't know, that's just my opinion. So if we remember the folks who are using comments as a form of documentation, we'll see that we're really sending a confusing message. And I keep hitting that twice. I'm just really excited up here, y'all. So it's super hard to find the right commenting style because of these competing interests. You know, we want our docs to, our code to be so clear that it speaks for itself. We don't want to spend the time writing documentation. We're worried about that signal to noise ratio. And so, you know, in this whole do as I say, not as I do environment that we sometimes find ourselves in, we make some pretty big mistakes. And I want to show you some early comments that Veronica wrote. So we're going to play a little game of critique those comments, and I'm going to show you some ugly, disgusting, filthy code. Some of you might need to cover your eyes. It's pretty bad. So here I did I did a project that started with a tutorial, and I said, well, I want to cite the tutorial that I used, so I'll put that right at the top of my doc, and then I'll continue. What do y'all think of this? Is this an okay use of comments? Just like a one-liner at the top saying, you know, everything started here? Give me a show of hands. Go show me some thumbs up, thumbs down, like a little thing like this. Okay. People are feeling some feelings. I see some thumbs going in all sorts of directions. So we might be able to reach a consensus if we sat down and like discussed it a little bit. But look at this next example. So this was my first time doing any web scraping, and I was using Beautiful Soup. And first time web scraping, first time with Beautiful Soup, early developer. I was using comments for a lot of different things. And I just want to tell you, so I worked very close to this student-run climbing wall. And the thing about students, you might know, the thing about students is when they're going to run something with flexible hours, they kind of like show up and they might be there for 1 hour. They're busy, they have things to do. So they'll update and say, we're here now, and then if you don't come to the climbing wall in the next hour, you lose out and you don't get to climb that day. There's no set hours or anything lovely like that. So I was working a whole 300 feet from this climbing wall, and I realized I kept missing hours, so I wanted to make myself an email notification that said, hey, you run to the climbing wall right now and you can, you know, squeeze in a climb during lunch. And that was my master plan. So here I am, my first time with Beautiful Soup. And yes! Okay, thank you. So I want to figure out if this climbing, if that nice little green box is lit up. So I, write some code that does some things. I write myself some to-dos. I'm essentially crossing out some non-working code because what if I need it again? Because I might write even worse non-working code. And I also want to show you, should I escape it? Or is it just love that it's there? Oh, what did I say? And my favorite comment of all time, oh good, it's a list. What would you do if you approached even one file that looked like this and you were thinking of contributing? There would be a stampede for the door if I suggested we turn this into an open source project in the next half hour. Right? You delete everything. Thank you so much. You take away all of my hard work. You're a wonderful audience member. And so I want to talk about, I was just getting started at the time and I was trying to figure out what it would take to become like a good developer. And I'm not sure that Air keyboard is all that important, but I think it helps. But I did determine that you need to know language and methods that you need to use. You need to apply problem solving and creative thinking skills. And then there's this communication and writing usable code element. And these are all pretty important, but we spend a lot of time on that first section. We concentrate on learning to code, on knowing a language. And I'm hoping that, in this talk, we can spend a little more time talking about the way those second two help us get to the mastery that we desire. So there's some best practices with comments. I had to dig for them. They're hard to find, and we disagree a lot on the internet about these items. But most of us can agree that for our function level document, for our function strings, we should have inputs, outputs, and explain what the transformation is. We can all agree that outdated comments, that signal to noise ratio, dirty, filthy lies, we don't like those. And I saw a lot on the internet that too much is too much. There's some disagreement about what that means, but that's the advice. And some people feel that line-by-line comments show a lack of understanding. So, what makes a good comment? Are you voting for the left or the right? Everybody loves the cat. It's just too much. Maybe I'll just put the cat up next time. And so as we're going back and forth on this, the thing that really ruins code is the lack of comments. That's the thing we don't like. Or, maybe labeling your cats as too much. The internet pops up and they have some advice for our confused, weary travelers. The internet says, refactor, don't use these comments, and only your code should matter. My favorite advice, and I actually saw this, and it feels a little bit like there's this squirrel standing in front of me yelling, stop! But it's not telling you what to do or where to go. It just, wants to steal all your food. So speaking of people that ruin things and steal food, let's talk about internet jerks. So we've got this person who much like I was trying to figure out, when are these comments, too much is too much, right? So what is too much? And when are they not enough? And they described their problem, and I don't want you to waste your time reading those slides, but they were really being thoughtful. And the response, the most liked response, was real helpful. This has been discussed to death, you boring newbie. And you must, that's what I heard when I see things like that. And I think it's really important to remember how our newest programmers experience comments. Comments are magic. So you mean to tell me that I can put a hashtag in front of some words and the interpreter won't see it and I can do anything I want in there? Right? Does everybody remember that moment where they're like, holy cow, this is amazing. Sometimes I talk to people and there's some folks who don't remember and they give me this face. And I have to remind them to just come back to me, whether it's decades. There was one time when you figured out that you could do this and you were amazed. So also, new folks are trying to learn an overwhelming amount of information at once. Our friend Diane here says, I don't know what the fuck I've done tonight. I committed a lot of stuff to get. Something JavaScript. And I don't know about you, but I would like to find as many ways as I can, within the code that we accept and the ways of learning that we accept to support Diane, because I want her to keep going. So what happens? Oh, I was going to give you another thing. I was going to tell you there are some ways that newbies will, I've seen newbies, as I've started mentoring and whatnot, use their code comments. Just like me, they might use them for storage, references, notes. I've seen folks who are hold up, I don't know how to do this. And they have written me a short little essay about how confused they were within their comments. And it was really heartwarming. And I just wanted that person to be able to continue having that as long as they need it. So what happens if we tell our newest programmers that code isn't okay? We'll be thinking about that in a minute. There was, just yesterday I was talking to a dev who says that they would put things they said, I live code in front of folks. And I want to I make live art demonstrations. And I need to get things working as quickly as possible. So when I'm coding, I write all sorts of things. I have to-do lists, and like when I fork something, I leave all those comments that are in there already, and I'll actually put my name in front of comments. So like they'd say V, like for Veronica, like this is Veronica's to-do list, not that other guy's to-do list. Does that make sense? So like they're moving fast, they just want it to work, they want to have something pretty, they want to inspire others and get something moving. And they said they even occasionally will say something like, Veronica was here, so that they know like where they left off as they're cobbling these bits of code together. And she said, really, the thing to do is to like, move fast, and instead of break things, maybe this person wants to like just write bad comments and like get their code moving. And it was really interesting to me to hear like from this person's perspective how much sense that made. And when we tell people that all their code needs to be clean, it can be like when those comments I showed you a little earlier, those are not my worst comments. Can you believe that? Like there are worse comments out there, but they don't exist anymore because when I got started, I was told to be taken seriously as a developer, I was going to have to commit only my cleaned up code to Git. That's kind of gross, right? No one else thinks that's gross, just me? So the next time I heard somebody say like, online say like, oh, commenting is an anti-pattern, I kind of couldn't let it go. So I did what everybody does when they're really mad about something. I went to Twitter. and I asked Twitter, I said, oh, hey, Twitter. I hear these people saying they've been dry forever and writing always code that does not repeat itself, so dry code. And I'm wondering if you've always been dry forever. Help me out, Twitter. And I'm very popular on Twitter. So I got 9 responses. Do you know how much you can do statistically with 9 responses? Positively nothing. And the split was almost 50-50 anyway. So I said, well, maybe I'm just doing that wrong. So since so many, over 50% of people claim their code has always been dry, I decided that maybe I had some folks in my Twitter feed that were robots and had really been writing dry from day one, or else we forget some things and our ideas of like how we write evolve. And plus 9 responses, I can't do anything with that. So I decided to start a much larger survey. Now these are too many words on a slide, and I know we all know that. So I'm gonna be a pal and I'm gonna give you a little bit of a hand there. So today we're gonna talk about a few of the radial questions I answered, asking when you add comments and how you use them roughly. And then I split these bottom 2 groups into like we're feeling positive about comments in green, and we're feeling kind of negative about comments in red. And we'll talk about some data there. So I said, what best describes your current or recent use of comments? And you comment when you're not certain? Do you comment each function? Should we be commenting each function? Probably. Do you use inline comments, those shameful comments that we all claim that we don't use? And do you comment unused code like, our, past Veronica with her beautiful soup experiment did? And good, I think it's 64%, but I cut off the number, of course, use those, shameful inline comments that we claim to not like very much. And that really surprised me. And I started to think like, well, maybe we are, using them, but knowing that we don't want to use them, or maybe they're actually useful and we should be more accepting of that. I don't know. There's some things happening there. And so when within your process do you add these comments? Do you do it when you're first scoping a project as you're experimenting? as you're completing a program as a way of documenting, during pairing and learning, and when others misunderstand. And the most common times to add in your comments was during experimentation, no surprise to any of us, I think, and when they're working with others and others misunderstand their code. So I asked, these are moving towards the like, how do we feel about comments, like broadly positive or broadly negative? And this is like a strong agree and a strong disagree. So comments help me remember what my code does. A good 40% say, strongest yes, and others say like, still a strong yes, and then there's a strong taper after that. Comments help me clarify my thinking. A lot of us use comments to help us clarify our thinking. Is anyone surprised by any of these results yet? Do we kind of use this the same way? I hear some heads bombing up. I know I pulled out the charts and like some people started taking naps. And it's rough to be after lunch. I totally get it. And one thing we pretty much everyone agreed on is comments save current and future developers time. Seems like something we should be spending time on, even if we don't have the time to spend, as was mentioned earlier. And then I asked a question near and dear to my heart as someone who felt they needed to remove their comments before submitting. The comments should be deleted before a project is shared, but it's fine to put in initially, like when you're locally, but you should always take them out before you add to GitHub. And apparently, I'm the only person who got the advice that they should be taking their comments down before they add to GitHub, because there's, you can see where we are, like 0.6% of people would have given me the advice my mentor gave. So I felt really good about that. Does everybody else feel pretty good about that? I'm going to make you do jumping jacks soon if you don't start, right? Don't. And then I asked, function level comments are acceptable, but inline comments are clutter. And a whole bunch of folks disagreed about that statement and said, inline comments are also a fine thing. And then this is the thing that really struck me. We've seen so far that we're like pretty comment positive among the respondents, are pretty comment positive. And then I asked the question that I see, the response I see on and on the internet, like, is clear code self-documenting and it doesn't need comments? And look at this disagreement, you all. So like, as positive as we are about how comments help us, and as accepting as we are of like the fact that they might exist, when we get to that question, we seem to have really internalized the voices of the internet jerk. I think they're all kind of playing in the back of our heads, because this is the response that comes out even next to those others. Anybody else getting some feelings about that? I had some feelings about that. I was like, wow, we should think about this more. So what comments should you be writing? This person uses ASCII art as part of their code as kind of a like, you are here. Has anybody ever written, like a game engine or something where like lots of things were going in and out, and you needed to really think about where you were at, or it might help someone new to your project to be able to be like, aha, this is how it all comes together. If you like this diagram and you want to make one of your own, there's a link right at the bottom of the screen. I want us to like, this quote caught my eye as I was reading about, about the business side of programming and projects. And it points out that, we think about code and what each project does a lot, but if we were to step back and kind of abstract a bit, we'd see that the code and the software that we're creating doesn't just, if you look at what problems it's solving, it shows us, the problems we care about, how we solve them, and our shared understanding about how problem solving should happen. And if I had to like sum this up in like one really short thing that's long enough to read on a slide, I would say like the comments we write, like the code that we write, it really teaches us like about ourselves and about where we're at. It shows what causes us confusion. It shows what documentation we need to be writing, what questions we still have unanswered. And yes, it does show us also the areas where we need to refactor. So what can we do, particularly to start like better support beginning programmers? And I know there's words on the bottom of the slide, and that's hard for the folks in the back, and I'm sorry about that. These will go online as well. And really, empathy was the thing that, you know, kept coming up. And that can be kind of hard, like, you know, to go back and remember the overwhelmed learner. And it can be really helpful to advise the current person that's sitting next to you trying to learn instead of some future idealized version of them. Like if you can say, hey, I see what you're doing there, and it's solving a problem for you right now, but you're probably gonna wanna move in this direction, it's much easier to like, and actionable to deal with that than just code better. There's a few suggestions that people had, particularly, you know, diving in and reading others' code. They suggested folks who are doing demos. If you made a comment as you were explaining the code to yourself, you can just leave that up. You can show your audience that, you know, that is part of your process. And I really want us to rethink code comments and say, what if we thought of them as docs? Would we start thinking of ways that we could avoid that code rot, where we could test that those bits that like aren't looked at? So, this is me. The survey is up there if you want to tweet it out. Please don't take the survey right now because you'll ruin the results and the scientist and me will cry and it will be terrible. And the slides will be up on my website soon. So thank you all. And do we have, okay, one or two questions. We'll see how fast it goes. And then, okay, we'll do clapping first. Yeah.
What do you think? I was told that anything where you comment out your code is something that should probably move to documentation.
I think that's a great, anytime you comment out your code, oh, that's interesting. So if you have, so you're saying if you have a block of code and there's like, oh, we don't need this function anymore, we simplified this, that should be, that decision process should be moved to documentation? That's an interesting idea. Has anyone else heard this or have thoughts about this? Yeah, I want to hear from one of you all. Person in the striped shirt, say some words and I'll make them louder.
Yeah, I thought that commenting on a code block, because I've done that many times, and what I've learned over time is that it's better to use source control. And remember, you can always go back. So.
Yes, if I could go back and I could tell that beautiful soup writing Veronica to use source control, I would. As far as the answer to your question, I haven't heard that, and that's certainly. Do you mean like are you? Every time you'd rewrite it. So if you simplify something, you're explaining the simplification or what's causing you to do that refactor. Okay. So idea here is if you're taking out code chunks within a refactoring to like explain what simplification, that's like if there's further abstraction or something. I haven't run into this, but I think it's a really interesting idea. And maybe we all chat about it later because I'm getting that nice red sign.